working on the furnace and it's in a dark corner of the basement and you hear some rustling around on the other side of the basement. Of course, you shine the flashlight over there and you don't see anything, but something is rooting around in there that's probably not too friendly.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 45 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 15. Every residential rental property has a system for keeping your residents warm in the colder months, and if they're lucky, cold in the warmer months. Depending on the age and condition of these systems, you or your residents could be spending a lot more on utilities than what is necessary. In order to save and make more money, it's important to understand how these systems work and how they can be more efficient. Today we talk about the different types of equipment that are used to heat and cool your property with Harvey Hansen from Indoor Climate Solutions, a Grand Rapids-based company since 2006. We'll be discussing forced air systems, hot water heat, and air conditioning choices, as well as energy-saving tips and techniques that will save you money and help you avoid possible disaster. How long has Indoor Climate Solutions actually been around?
Well, we started when we moved to the area in 2007 is when we started in business. Now, that doesn't mean that's when I started in business. I've been in this industry now as a tradesman and as a contractor. It's 45 years now. I worked 10 years as a tradesperson, and then I started a company in 1982, the last big downturn of the economy, when nobody else had work or everybody else was going broke. And I ran that company for 25 years.
So this was your company, but it was somewhere else. Where was this located?
Far west suburbs of Chicago, Wheaton area.
So you ran that, and then what made you decide to move to Grand Rapids?
My youngest son, David, has been severely disabled since birth. We knew he was going to age out of the facility he was at in Illinois. And basically, we've been looking for a long time. We knew that was going to happen. We're looking for a place for him to stay, to spend really the rest of his life.
Okay. So you found a place in Grand Rapids then?
In Jenison, yes. Harbor House Ministries.
Okay, great. And that made you decide, okay, we'll move to Grand Rapids and restart a new business doing the same thing there.
Yeah, we had to relocate. And because we weren't going to just send him off on his own. So, yes, we had to relocate, and that was a big decision for our family. Ryan had just gotten married at that time in 2006, and realized that this could be a great place to live and raise a family. He moved here in 2006, I moved in 2007.
And when was the decision made to start Indoor Climate Solutions together?
Probably when we realized the situation with David was going to work out well. It was probably the early part of 2006. Then we started making plans with what would we do here?
You know, what is it Indoor Climate Solutions specializes in? What do you guys do?
We do all types of heating and air conditioning and sheet metal work. Our main focus has always been forced air heating, as that's the most popular amount. But in the early 90s, when radiant heating came back into vogue, then we've got training in that to work on hot water boilers, steam boilers, and designing hydronic systems.
All right, well, great. Well, you know, this podcast is for rental property owners and real estate investors. Wouldn't hurt to start by just kind of starting with the basics. Like if you're buying a rental property, what do you help people look for? Or what do you advise people look for before they purchase?
You know, in these rental properties, there's a wide range of types of systems, whether it's the old gravity furnace from the 1920s, whether it's a 60% efficient furnace, a natural draft furnace from the probably 60s or 70s. And we have the 80% efficient furnaces. Usually, they're still making 80% efficient furnaces, but they started those in the mid-80s. And then the high efficiency ones.
You know, a lot of times you go into, especially in Grand Rapids, if you're buying a rental property, quite often it's a very old rental property. It's at least 50 to 100 years old. I mean, and some of them are even older than 100 years. So you see that quite often. The dilemma is always there. Should I replace the heating and cooling system? When do you advise, maybe you just let it go until it craps out on you, as opposed to, well, you should probably replace it right away because it's going to just drag down your costs?
A lot of that determines on who's going to pay the gas bill. If the tenant is paying the gas bill and you have a 50% efficient furnace, they're going to be paying more for gas than maybe the average person would be doing, and that might be reflected in their ability to pay the rent. So the higher efficiency equipment, a lot of people are afraid of that. There's more problems with it. There probably is a little bit more, but I think the payback there is there for the high efficiency equipment.
And when you say high efficiency, how efficient are they? 90%?
They talk about 80% is really our standard efficiency today that we're able to sell. And then it goes into the 90%. And 90 would be from 92 to 97%.
But are you saying that with the higher efficient mechanical equipment, there's more problems than there would be with the traditional older boilers or the methods of heating?
Yeah, I mean, if we compared it to a gravity air heating system, there's really nothing to go wrong there. There's no moving parts. There's no blower.
On a gravity system, there's nothing that can go wrong.
Right. Well, it's a gas valve and a thermocouple and a safety control.
Very simple.
Very simple. Very simple.
And,
so
and now what do we have? Like when you install a new system, it's a high efficiency system.
High efficiency system, whether it's an 80 or 90, you have a draft inducer, usually a spark or hot surface ignition, and a relays or a circuit board that controls the operation of that furnace.
So are there more points then where things can go wrong in the newer systems?
Yeah, there's just more components in it, and compared to a gravity type furnace.
Right, but yet they're more efficient, so you are saving on gas costs or
Correct.
Other types of heating costs. What is the typical payback period if you move from an older system to a high efficiency system?
We've been looking at, depending on the price of gas and how it's used, we're looking at 4 to 7 years.
4 to 7 years. Okay. And are there tax credits or any other incentives offered that help you make that decision?
Right now, there aren't any tax credits available, but there are rebates through the utility companies.
Does that factor into your 4 to 7 year payback?
No, that was strictly a calculation on gas usage and an average price. So no, we didn't put in there any rebates or tax incentives as those come and go. And we don't have any control over those.
All right, well, Harvey, let's kind of divide it, because we're talking about heating and cooling systems. So let's sort of divide it between the forced air systems and then the water-based systems. And let's focus on forced air right now. What are some of the issues and the maintenance requirements?
Well, typically the problems that we see with today's furnaces, and this is all forced air furnaces. Number one, if you have a call for a no heat situation, first thing to do is if the battery is a digital thermostat, to change the batteries in that thermostat. That's a big problem. People don't pay attention to that. It kind of sits on the wall and they ignore it until there's a problem. If you have a no heat call from your tenant, really the first thing to have them check if you have a digital thermostat is the batteries, or replace the batteries in the thermostat.
So would you say that's the number one reason why the heat might not be working?
That is a good possibility. And when people call us, that's the first thing we talk about, replace the batteries in the thermostat.
So right there is a good tip. I mean, you can save a lot of money on a service call if you just check your batteries.
Well, some thermostats have a battery indicator on them. Others only give it to you when they're running low. The manufacturer says that replace the batteries once a year. But we find that if you change batteries every other year, you'd be in great shape. The thermostat manufacturers have all made that fairly simple to do. There's all types, common batteries, AA or AAA, and sometimes the older ones are 9-volt batteries, but easily available.
Okay. Other tips that you have for forced air systems?
Then I would say the next issue is the filter. When was that replaced? That can cause a no heat situation.
Why is that? Does the filter get clogged up and then air just stops going through it? Or?
Correct. When the filter gets plugged up, especially on newer furnaces, and this is furnaces within the last 30 years, if that furnace cycles off on limit during a heating cycle, X amount of times, depending on the manufacturer, then that unit would shut down. Now, some of them shut down until it's restarted manually. Other ones will start up on their own after an hour or so.
So how often should people be changing the filters?
In our experience, we found that if you've changed the filter in a forced air system in September when you start using the heat, and then again at the first of the year, January, that works out well. If you have air conditioning on that system, then when you start using the air conditioning, I would change that furnace filter again. So for heating only, twice a year, and of course all of that depends on the age of the house, the occupants, dogs, kids, that type of thing.
Okay, and for people like me who are not very handy, where would I find this filter?
The filters are typically right next to the furnace, on the side of the cabinet, or in a rack attached to the furnace. Some, they have them behind the blower door where there's no external filter rack. So now you're taking the doors off and have to get those put back on because there's a safety switch on those doors if they're not put down.
So if you're not confident in what you're doing, or if you don't know what you're doing, there's a little bit of investigation required as to finding where the filter actually goes.
Yeah, I would just say take time and look at that situation and to find out. Now, on all of our installations, we put in an external filter rack. In other words, when you walk up to the furnace, you see the filter, you can slide it out with 2 fingers and slide the new one back in.
I always get confused because you're supposed to put the filter in a certain way, facing a certain direction. But I always end up spending about 5 minutes trying to figure out which way that is. Why can't it be simpler?
It's very simple, and we have a tool to eliminate that problem. Since that is one of our we get a great number of questions about filter size and airflow direction. So we developed a sticker that we put on the furnace that says that we write in what the proper filter size is, and then we write in which way the air flows.
Okay, so you try to idiot-proof it for
people
like me.
Yeah, that's what we try and do. One other comment about the filter situation. I have a lot of landlords tell us that, the tenant takes care of the filters. I would say that for the most part, the tenants don't take care of the filters. There is that rare occasion. And if there's a problem, they'll be very good at pulling the filter out and leaving that equipment run without a filter. So I think overall, landlords are best served if they could use that filter change as a reason to go into the house to check on their property.
Good point. 2 good points there. Don't assume your tenant's going to replace the filter for you. And it's probably better not to let them do it and use the opportunity to go and replace that filter yourself as an opportunity to just check on the house or the rental property and make sure that the tenant is taking good care of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the worst thing that you could do is run that furnace, especially if it's a 90% efficient or if has air conditioning without a filter.
And what kind of damage does that cause?
Well, all of that dirt that would normally collect on the filter will now be collecting on the motor, the blower wheel, and then ultimately on a coil, if it's an air conditioning coil or the secondary coil on a 90% furnace. And that's an expensive thing to get cleaned up.
What other examples have you seen where tenants may have led to expensive damage to the furnace?
Stacking boxes or clothing, that type of thing, in front of the furnace. The furnace requires air to burn the gas. Typically on the older furnaces, there's a louvered door in the front, and that's where it gets its combustion air from. If that gets closed over, gets blocked, then that furnace could soot up. If
that furnace could soot up?
Could soot. Because what happens is the gas does not have enough oxygen to burn completely, and then there's soot is a byproduct of incomplete combustion. When the soot's up, then it clogs up the heat exchanger passageways. There's not enough draft for the burners to burn properly. What happens then is the burners are looking for a place to go, and it ends up coming out in front of the furnace.
Okay.
So in reality, blocking the front of the furnace over time can cause a fire. especially if they have clothing or cardboard in front of the furnace. The flames come out the front of the furnace looking for that air, and that's how the fires start.
So you've seen this happen? Mm-hmm. That seems like quite a warning there,
Right.
to make sure that your tenant's not putting all their clothes in boxes in front of their furnace.
That's exactly it. Same with the water heater, stacking stuff around the water heater. All of the mechanical equipment that uses gas to burn needs to have space around it.
Needs airflow. Other tips regarding forced air units?
We have had issues with the older homes with the return air grills on the floor. Tenants have rugs or clothes or whatever, and they block those grills. That's really has the same effect as a plugged filter.
So you want to make
So
sure
you need
that
to
the
have the
grills in the
airflow.
floor are open and not covered up by a rug or carpet, in order to make sure that you have proper airflow.
Correct.
And if you don't, if the tenant throws a rug over them, what could happen?
Well, it's going to have the same effect as a clogged furnace filter. That furnace could cycle off, be cycling on limit. It could shut itself off depending on the style of furnace, but they're going to be restricted in the amount of heat they have.
Well, Harvey, let's talk about hot water heat then. When I grew up, I had the forced air system. So I didn't know that radiators existed until I started buying rental property. What can you tell us about hot water heat and hydronic type systems?
Well, that's a great way of heating. It really works out well if you're doing multiple zones, as in an apartment building. In a single-family home, it's a great way to heat. There's a few different types of radiators, cast iron ones, which are almost indestructible. And then you have the fin tube baseboard, which is susceptible to more damage.
You say it's a great way to heat. Is it because it's a more efficient system? It uses less gas? I mean, why do you say it's a great way?
Well, I wouldn't say the efficiency is mainly on the combustion end of the equipment. You can have high efficiency boilers, as you can furnaces also. I would say that it's very versatile, where you can have adapts itself well to zoning. In a single family home, you might want to zone a second floor with its own thermostat, first floor, and then a basement. That's why in apartment buildings, if you have a lot of small apartments, one bedroom or studio, or even 2-bedroom apartments, they have one boiler in one building, and that would service all those units.
Okay, and what are some tips you have for the hot water systems?
The hot water systems are very reliable. There's a few things that you need to watch out for. Because they're so reliable, they tend to be neglected because there's no filters to change. They pretty much sit there and do their thing. In that situation, we have to watch out more for keeping burners clean. With the boilers, typically the boilers are set directly on the floor and the burners are on the bottom. The burners, as they draw in air for combustion, act like a small vacuum cleaner. So all that dirt and dust that's on the floor gets sucked into the burners. So we have more problems with boilers sooting up than we do furnaces, just for that reason. They're kind of neglected because there's not a regular maintenance program, and then where the burners are situated near the floor.
So could that start a fire then?
That can. It was really the same situation as a gas furnace. Flames are going to be looking for air, and it comes out the front. Typically on those, and the furnaces also, depending on the type of furnace, it burns up the wiring, and when it shorts out the wiring, then it turns off the gas, and now you have a no heat situation, but an expensive repair bill.
The boiler systems are deceptively easy to maintain, but are you recommending some sort of maintenance program for them?
Yes, depending on a standard cast iron boiler, where the burners are close to the floor, you should at least have those things looked at and serviced every other year. At that time, we would check the relief valve, look at the pressure in the boiler. If the expansion tank gets waterlogged, we could have problems with that. Oil the pumps if that's the situation. Just go through and to do that maintenance.
And what about, we get complaints sometimes about knocking, in the noise that the radiators make. How would we get rid of that?
I found that there's two types of knocking, and I would say one is more of expansion and copper fin tube radiators, more of a ticking sound. It's not a heavy duty sound, but just the expansion contraction in the radiators. There's really not a lot that you can do to prevent that. Some of the newer baseboards have a plastic slide that the fin tubes slide on, so it's not as much. For the most part, it's hard to get away from. On the other hand, the way the system was piped originally, if the piping is rubbing on the floor or a floor joist or something like that, as the pipes expand and contract, that can give you sometimes a knocking situation, depending on how tight they are and how they expand. So there's not really a clear fix for that. Sometimes it's just a matter of making sure the pipes have clearance around them.
On some of my properties that actually you guys at Indoor Climate Solutions actually maintain, we have some energy-saving technology that's used both indoor and outdoor. Can you talk about that?
That's another beauty of the hot water systems, is an outdoor reset control. And what that does is monitors the outdoor temperature, and then the control adjusts the water temperature in the boiler accordingly. Typically, the boilers are designed at 0 degrees outdoor temperature to maintain 70 degrees indoor temperature. A lot of times you'll see these boilers designed for 180 degrees. Now, if it's 40 degrees outside, you still need heat, but you don't need the water to be 180 degrees. What the outdoor reset control does is then lowers the water temperature in the boiler, and you might be operating with 125 degree water.
So by lowering the water temperature in the boiler, you're saving on gas costs?
Yeah, you don't have to heat the water as much. The burners are off more than they're on.
And this is a separate technology that you install to help your existing boiler system, or do the new high-efficiency boiler systems include this technology?
Most of the new high-efficiency boilers include that technology. Some of the 80% efficient boilers, the government has wanted a form of outdoor reset, but it really doesn't work the same as a standalone control. It does not monitor the outdoor temperature. The other great thing about the outdoor reset control is that we can set that at 65 degrees or whatever we set it at to turn the heat off.
So if you're saying if the temperature outside gets to 65 degrees or higher, then the boilers just shut off and there's no heat that goes to the units.
That's correct. If you've got tenants that have the windows open and the thermostat cranked to 80 degrees, they're going to find that they're going to run out of heat quick.
And that's the same device? Because I know on several of my properties, you guys have installed the Tecmar device?
Yes.
And does that do what both things that you just mentioned?
Yes.
Okay, so it's an outdoor sensor, and depending on the temperature outside, it will control the heat that's in the boiler.
Yes.
The heat of the water. And if the temperature gets above a certain degree outside, it will just shut off the boiler entirely.
Correct.
One of the things you notice here in Grand Rapids when we have really cold winters is that sometimes the heat is so hot in these older buildings where you can't control it as well that you see people with their windows open in the middle of winter because their units are getting so hot. And I guess when you see that, that's an indication that there's a problem.
Well, it's not really a problem with the boiler. What you're saying is it's a problem with wasted energy. Is the tenants, as they like to keep the temperature 75, 78 degrees, but as they realize, that dries the air out. So now they open the window to get more moisture into the home or apartment, and that's why they have the windows open. So they crank the thermostat up and open the windows.
So they have hot and cold at the same time.
Well, they're looking for the moisture because otherwise they're really dried out.
If I'm paying for the heat, then that's great for them, isn't it?
Well, they love it, and that's why when we install the outdoor reset, we're just going to give them enough heat to maintain 70, 72 degrees. We can adjust it. We don't adjust it per temperature, but by water temperature. So then you could be getting a call from the tenants saying, that they'll say they don't have any heat at 72 degrees because they want it 78 or 80.
Is there a legal limit at where the heat has to be?
I believe in Grand Rapids, the minimum temperature is 65 degrees. I could be wrong on that. I don't know for sure. That's what we've always used.
What other energy-saving tips and techniques do you have?
Really, the maintenance of the equipment. What I would say also is enforce there, really any of the heating equipment, to keep a service log of what you've done with the equipment. It helps us sometimes in diagnosing what issues are. If we know that the gas valve has been recently replaced, that we're not really looking, and we have another issue with a no heat, that we're not going to be looking so much at the gas valve as being a problem. It's really the same way as you maintain your car. Keep track of what's been done to the car. It's not as complicated as a car, but but just understanding what has been done, the intervals you need to have those things changed out and filters replaced.
We've talked about the forced air systems. We've talked about the hot water heat systems. What about air conditioning?
Well, with air conditioning, airflow is critical with air conditioning, even more so than with the heat. So the filter situation is still important. That still applies if you have window units or through-the-wall units. Sometimes those console air conditioners, like you see in motels, they have filters on them also. That's another critical part. Window air conditioners, you might have to clean that filter a couple of times a season because it's so small.
When you say clean the filter, do you actually clean it or just replace it?
With the forced air furnace, then it would be the same filter you'd use for the furnace. Mm-hmm. For the window or through-the-wall units and those console units that you'd see in motels, usually those are washable filters because they're a specific size, and you're not going to find those. So it's really more of a screen to catch the lint.
You know, a lot of rental property owners own properties that don't have air conditioning, but maybe because they're trying to appeal to a different type of tenant, they might want to put air conditioning in. Mm-hmm. What thoughts should they have when they do that? That
they have the appropriate furnace to do it with enough airflow. Again, the air conditioning is more critical with airflow, so the duct sizing then becomes a possible issue. It needs to be taken care of. And then where are you going to put the outdoor unit? In Grand Rapids, it's going to have to be in the backyard, not in the side yard. The other thing you need to be thinking about is dogs in the proximity, and then the kids. I mean, there's a lot of damage that can occur.
You mean kids banging on it or dogs doing their business on it?
Yep, dogs peeing on it will rot out that.
That's not good for the equipment.
No.
What about rain?
It's not really a problem with the rain. It's more acid rain from the dogs.
Okay. It sounds like if you have an existing furnace, you can integrate your air conditioning with the furnace and the vents and everything. But you just need the outdoor, what is it, condenser outside?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You need to put the condenser outside and make sure that your vents are big enough to
the ductwork. Yeah, the ductwork. And that the furnace is appropriate. Now, you can't do it with a gravity furnace. Forced air furnace, if the ductwork is decent and there's room for that air conditioning coil on top of the furnace, then it works out fine.
And if you don't have a furnace, I mean, what are some other options?
If you don't have a furnace, if you have the hot water heat, of course, they got the window units. They have units similar to window units that go through the wall, cut an opening in a wall with a wall sleeve. Again, those motel-type units, console-type air conditioning units, those are also through the wall. The other one that we've done a lot with is the mini-split air conditioning. There's a couple of different styles of indoor units on that, whether it's mounted on the sidewall, blows through the ceiling, and they also have a console-type low-mounted unit, and then the outdoor unit, again, it's a smaller unit, and that would mount on the wall outside.
You have any opinions on those?
I would say the most popular is the traditional central air conditioning with the furnace. The drawback to the window and through the wall air conditionings is the noise, usually. So the mini splits really takes the best of both worlds, moves the noisemaker, which is a condensing portion, outside, and you're just moving air through the house with the indoor unit.
Sounds like there's good options nowadays for air conditioning. Any other tips or thoughts on air conditioning?
Well, with the air conditioning, whether it's a central, whether it's a window unit, or any other type, there is no filter. There's a filter for the indoor coil, but no filter for the outdoor coil. So that draws in bugs and dirt, grass clippings. That has to be hosed out. Spraying on the outdoor unit is really the only way to clean those. If you did that once a year, that outdoor unit would maintain its efficiency almost as if it was new.
What are some of the hazards of what you do? What are some of the things that you've encountered?
In basements, we've run into working on the furnace, and it's in a dark corner of the basement, and you hear some rustling around on the other side of the basement, and then, of course, you shine the flashlight over there, and you don't see anything, but in the pile of stuff that's over there, then you know there's something is rooting around in there that's probably not too friendly, but we don't go investigate too much farther. Ryan did have a situation where he had a furnace that had a problem with the blower motor, and he opens the door of the blower door of the furnace, and a bat flew out. Now we're trying to wonder, how did the bat get in there? We never did figure that out because it had a filter and it was inside the house. And this house was not a rental home. This was probably a $500,000 house. When you're working on the air conditioning, usually that's the thing. The wasps either make their nest inside the unit or in the disconnect, especially rooftop units.
So is that just a hazard of your job, or do you run away and say, you better call animal control before I come back?
No, we keep spray on the truck for the bees and rats or bats. Usually we don't have, they're not aggressive like bees and wasps could be. So no, we take care of those issues.
Harvey, thanks so much for taking the time to share this information with us. I think you've given us some great tips and ideas that hopefully will help rental property owners and real estate investors save money on their energy costs, and give them something to think about if they need to upgrade or change out their systems. So thanks so much for taking the time this morning.
Okay, we had a great time doing it. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.